Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. When you think of the Middle Ages, what comes to mind? Knights in shining armor, majestic castles, maybe even a few dragons. Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on this thousand-year period and reveal some things that are way stranger and, frankly, more shocking than you might imagine. Forget the fairy tales, the reality was a wild ride. So buckle up as we dive into 10 shocking facts about the Middle Ages that they definitely didn't teach you in history class. First up, let's talk about animals on trial. Yes, you heard that right. In medieval Europe, animals could be taken to court, accused of crimes, and even sentenced. We're not just talking about a dog that bit someone. There are records of pigs being tried for murder, weevils being excommunicated from a vineyard for eating the grapes, and even a rooster being put on trial for the unnatural crime of laying an egg. These weren't just kangaroo courts, either. The animals were often assigned a lawyer, witnesses were called, and the proceedings were taken very seriously. The belief was that all of God's creatures were subject to his law, and that included facing justice in a human court. Imagine being a lawyer whose star client is a pig. It's a bizarre legal loophole that shows just how different their worldview was. Next, let's get into fashion. You've probably seen portraits of medieval noblemen with those ridiculously long, pointy shoes. These weren't just a quirky style choice. They were a status symbol called palanes or krakos. The longer the point, the more important and wealthy you were. It got so out of hand that some points were to feet long. They were so impractical that men had to tie the tips to their knees with a small chain just to walk without tripping. Eventually, laws were passed to regulate the length of shoe points based on social class. A commoner couldn't have points longer than 6 inches, while a prince could have them as long as he wanted. It was the ultimate and most inconvenient fashion statement. Alright, fact number 3 is a bit gross, so brace yourselves. Let's talk about medieval medicine. Forget sterile operating rooms. If you needed surgery, you'd likely visit a barber surgeon. These guys were your one-stop shop for a haircut, a shave, and maybe an amputation or some bloodletting. The iconic red and white barber pole. It originally symbolized the bloody bandages wrapped around a pole. Bloodletting was a common treatment for almost everything, based on the idea of balancing the bodies for humors. They also used some questionable remedies, like using live snail slime to treat a sore throat or applying a paste of moss scraped from a human skull to cure a headache. It's a miracle anyone survived. Moving on to something a bit more lighthearted, but equally strange. Football, or what they called mob football. Forget the organized sports you know today. Medieval football was pure chaos. Entire villages would play against each other, with the goal being to get an inflated pig's bladder to the opposing village's church by any means necessary. There were virtually no rules. Kicking, punching, and wrestling were all part of the game. Games could last all day, cover miles of countryside, and often resulted in serious injuries and property damage. It was so violent that multiple kings tried to ban it, but the people just loved their brutal, chaotic version of the beautiful game too much to stop. Now for fact number 5, which might change how you see medieval romance. The idea of chivalry often conjures images of knights being perfectly polite to ladies. But the code of chivalry was less about romance and more about a warrior-esque code of conduct among fellow knights. It was about loyalty, honor in battle, and protecting the church. The whole courtly love thing, where a knight would pine for a noble lady, was more of a literary fantasy. In reality, marriages were political and economic arrangements. That said, they did have a weird legal concept called trial by combat for love, where 2 men could legally fight, sometimes to the death, over a woman's hand. So much for gentle wooing, halfway through, and it's time to talk about time itself. Today, we live by the clock, minute by minute. But in the Middle Ages, the concept of time was much more fluid. Most people didn't have clocks. Their day was structured around the sun and the ringing of church bells for prayers. An hour wasn't always 60 minutes. In winter, daylight hours were shorter, and in summer, they were longer. This flexible system, called temporal hours, meant that the length of an hour changed with the seasons. It wasn't until mechanical clocks became more common in towns that the idea of a fixed equal hour started to take hold. It's a reminder that even something as basic as time is a human invention. Fact number 7 takes us into the world of books. Before the printing press, every single book had to be copied by hand, a painstaking process done by monks in monasteries. But here's the shocking part. These monks didn't just copy text. They would doodle, complain, and write hilarious notes in the margins of these sacred manuscripts. You can find drawings of knights fighting snails, bizarre human-animal hybrids, and even little notes from the scribes themselves, like, "Oh, my hand," or "This parchment is hairy," or my personal favorite, "Thank God, it will soon be dark." These little medieval memes give us a wonderfully human glimpse into the tedious lives of the people who preserved knowledge for centuries. Let's talk about divorce. We often think of the past as being incredibly strict, with marriage being for life, no exceptions. While divorce was indeed difficult to obtain and forbidden by the Catholic Church, people found some creative workarounds. One of the most common methods was to claim the marriage was invalid in the first place. You could argue that you were related, even by a distant, convoluted connection. Or you could claim you were pre-contracted to someone else, even if there was no proof. Impotence was also grounds for annulment, which sometimes led to a bizarre public test of potency to prove or disprove the claim. It shows that where there's a will and a desperate couple, there's a way. Fact number 9 is about hygiene. The stereotype is that medieval people were filthy and never bathed. This is a bit of an exaggeration. Public bathhouses were actually quite common and popular in the early Middle Ages. They were social hubs where people could get clean, eat, and hang out. However, their reputation declined over time as they became associated with disease and debauchery, and many were shut down. But people did still wash. They used basins of water at home and valued cleanliness. Where they really differed from us was their understanding of germs. They didn't know about bacteria, so while they might wash their hands, they'd happily drink water from the same river everyone else was dumping their waste into. So, cleaner than you think, but still not germ-free. And finally, our 10th shocking fact: forks were considered scandalous. That's right, the humble fork was seen as an unmanly and overly dainty Italian invention. Most people in medieval Europe ate with their hands, a spoon, and a personal knife. When a Byzantine princess brought small, two-pronged golden forks to Venice in the 11th century, she was mocked. One cleric even wrote that God had given humans natural forks their fingers and that using an artificial one was an insult to the Creator. It took centuries for the fork to be accepted across Europe. So, next time you're eating pasta, remember that you're wielding an object that was once considered a shocking and sinful piece of technology. And there you have it, 10 shocking facts that paint a very different picture of the Middle Ages. It was a time of bizarre laws, dangerous sports, and some truly questionable fashion choices. It goes to show that history is always more complex and a lot weirder than we think. Which of these facts surprised you the most? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.